That's all right. Thank you so much, firstly, for having me here. And I'm so honored by all of you. I think there's about 80 odd people. Geez, I feel like I'm really put on the spot. And what's funny is I know Michael outside his sort of teaching element. So it's quite interesting to see him in his element. So yeah, I wish I could just get to know everyone here so that it would be far more personable than some brown dude on the screen talking. So it would just be much easier that way. But anyway, that aside, perhaps what we can do, I was just thinking because I didn't actually have much time. So I got half an hour when Michael was like, just have a look at what we want to talk about. And I didn't want to sort of freestyle and waste your time, but I think I will freestyle, but I won't waste your time in a way, because I want to be able to take a step back, perhaps going into it deeply rather than going right within politics and right within Western political framework and the discourse that takes place in the 17th century onwards in the last 300 years, what we call the age of modernity, and the ideology of what's called modernism. It's a bit of a funky word. And what we see after Second World War, postmodernism. What I'll do is I'll take a step back. I think we've got an hour. Do we have an hour, roughly, give or take?
Uh, Maybe like 90
I
minutes.
can
Hours.
I can go as long as you wish. I can talk till the cows come home because this is what I love doing. It's what I studied. But it's up to you whether you want to stay around that long. Um, but first and foremost, within my intellectual tradition, we always ask who to take the knowledge from, and it's important to ask what they've studied. So for me personally, I'll just give you a quick brief of what my background is, just so you understand where I'm coming from, why I'm speaking what I'm speaking about. I initially was brought up here, born overseas in the Middle East. I was born in Saudi Arabia to Bengali parents, which, God bless them, but the first generation experience is quite interesting for a migrant. Coming here, having attended school here, I went to Melbourne High. I thought, I was a math science student. I was like, well, if you're not doing medicine, engineering, being an investment banker, then what are you doing with your life, right? That's what I was told. So all the way through high school, I was a math science nerd, and double science, double maths, VCE, all the way through HSC for some of you that are always, some of you from interstate. And then when I went to university, I started studying, arts, commerce and law. And I started asking myself all these questions that came about that never were answered for me. Like, why do I want to study medicine? Or why do I want to study engineering? Or what is the meaning and purpose of life? Even bigger, right? So at that moment, I had sort of this existential crisis because it went through the global financial crisis of the time. And I was working in accounting finance at Deloitte. And I asked myself, I don't want to sort of study these real life implications of a world when I don't know how it's created or constructed. So I switched my degree and I started studying philosophy, politics, economics. And on the side, I started studying comparative religion, sociology, social theory, cultural theory, all the things that construct the world. And this was roughly in 2008, 2010. I had a very close friend, Fraser, who came and, said, well, why don't we start tutoring GAMSAT? And then so we did. And we started Fraser's GAMSAT tuition at that time. And then I taught for 10 years, traveled the world, tried to learn multiple languages. Then I came back to Australia thanks to COVID. So that's a little bit about me. I'm speaking too fast. Is that Ruby?
No, that wasn't me, bro.
You're speaking
fine. Okay. You could speed up, if anything.
No, that's fine. So I studied philosophy, economics, politics. I taught political economy and economics at La Trobe University. Also had a gig overseas, a couple of universities, and here I am. Very honored to be here with Michael. And let's just talk about the GAMSAT. I think one of the questions that was asked earlier is, how do I write with clarity, right? How do I write with conviction? And one of the things I always have told my students is that clarity of writing comes from clarity of thought. You're not going to be able to come up with something that's going to be clear without your intellectual ideas, and what you can think is going to be clear. And as you know, the GAMSAT, 50% of it is divided into humanities and social sciences. So without going too deep into the politics, I will get into that. I just want to take a step back, and perhaps if I can share screen with you, is that okay, Michael? Yeah? if
man,
I can share
just gonna let you.
screen, that way, what I can do is I can start drawing a few things. And I hope you'll be able to see it. Let me just turn my camera off so it's not too up close and ugly. And what I'd like to do is like sort of understand why the GAMSAT is going through what's called humanities, right, and social sciences, and what make up the humanities and social sciences. And then this will give us a framework on how we understand, for example, politics, philosophy, task A, task B, essays, section 1 questions, etc. Many of you have probably read through the ISAR GAMSAT booklet. If you haven't, please do so, because a lot of the answers, a lot of the questions of what they're going to ask actually is framed there. So you can frame your study through the ISAR GAMSAT booklet. So if we have a look at the humanities, the question really is about what makes a human being. Yeah, excuse me. So there are subjects, for example, like philosophy, right, languages, things like, literature, religion. These are all what constitute the humanities. And when we talk about this, it's important for us to be able to understand and go through what each of these areas are, because what it will do is it will give you the tools, the ideas to be able to write the essays with clarity if you understand what they are. So if this is philosophy, philosophy, language, literature, religion, arts, then what are the social sciences? The social sciences come up later on and really is about the study of society rather than the study of the human beings. So for example, sociology, the study of society, right? Anthropology, which is the study of the anthropos, or the human being, right? Economics, which is the study of household or markets. Then we've got things like politics, which what Michael covered, or parts of it he's covered, history, law, etc. Things that are social phenomena. By the way, please, if you're getting bored and you want me to change, or if it's not beneficial, please let me know.
No, it's so good. I don't even care about them. I just want to listen to you. Keep going, please.
That's all right. No problem.
It's so good.
So we've got this division between humanities and social sciences, but historically this division didn't exist in disciplines, you see. Medicine goes back to science, which goes back to natural philosophy, which goes back to philosophy, right? So philosophy in many ways is the foundation of all studies. There's a philosophy of maths, there's a philosophy of science, there's a philosophy of everything that we do. And so if humanities and social sciences are these disciplines, that we know that these are the disciplines that we should study, or at least the foundations of which, in order to smash section 1 and 2, right? That's where I would probably start. Now, if we were to go through each one of them very quickly, a romp through a sort of discipline, and then we'll go into the history of ideas. And hopefully maybe I will share this file with you afterwards, so you actually have a mind map of what you're studying. So what is philosophy then? What does philosophy mean? I wrote in the previous page, philosophia, which is the love of wisdom, right? Okay, Fadi's in the room now. Philosophia, philo meaning love, and sophia meaning wisdom. So whenever I meet a Sophia or Sophia, I was like, wow, you must be really wise. And they look at me weird, like, dude, stop trying to hit on me, right? But it's an amazing, amazing word, Sophia, because wisdom is something that comes at the end of a journey, at the end of your studies and practice, etc. right? Generally speaking, it's very difficult to find wise people who are young and stupid like me, right? So it becomes quite interesting then that if this is the love of wisdom, then what is philosophy about when we say it's a study of foundation? So philosophy, all philosophy, study really 4 main questions. Number 1, who are we, right? Who are we? i.e., what is human nature, right? How do we understand existence, right? And this is really what's called for a funky name, the existential question. So if you're writing an essay, you can actually go, well, this topic really hits the essence of the existential question, what makes the human being? For example, that's a question that you can frame in the introduction, and the rest of the essay will answer that question, right? Who are we? Number 2, how the hell did we get here? Yeah, how did we get here? Excuse my terrible handwriting, but I'm hoping you'll be able to understand it. And this is really you can say the historical question. And in many ways, it's also what's called a cosmological question. Ooh, big word, cosmological. What the heck does that mean? So cosmological is about the study of the cosmos or the universe. Yeah. How did we get here? Where do we come from? So, okay, biologically, we know there's, my dad has XX gene, chromosomes, and then dad has XY, mom has XX, and so on and so forth. But then how did human beings get here? There are different theories that are there. Evolution is one of them. How does existence come about? There's a time that, for example, this laptop that I'm working on didn't exist, right? It came into being, and so on and so forth. And then the third question really is, now that I'm here, why the heck am I here, right? Why am I here? Or you can say, what's a good way of saying it? See, this is why I prefer to have notes. So I'm not just freestyling. You can say, how should we live, right? Or how should I live? Which is really a question about purpose and meaning. Yeah. And if it's about purpose and meaning, then it's really, how should I live is more of an ethical question. Yeah. It's about value. Are there any other questions there? So this is the ethical question or the meaningful question or the purposeful question that everybody has a purpose in life. Yeah. And then the fourth question is, well, we got here, and now that we're here, what's happening? Where are we going? Right? Where are we going? Such a plain question, right? Dude, where are you going? But it has such deep implication. Yeah. And to use another funky word, it's the sort of study after death, what's called the eschatological question. Eschatological question. Yeah. So we've got an existential question. We've got a cosmological question or the historical question. There's a purposeful, meaningful, the ethical question. And then we've got eschatological question, right? Eschatology. Ology is the study of, or the logical study of, and eschaton is the hereafter. So these kind of questions are fundamental questions to philosophy that all philosophy deals with, and historically all religions also deal with. Now, please forgive me for using the word versus. I only use the word versus when I'm playing FIFA or watching the Champions League, generally. But I don't want to create a tension between philosophy and religion. And in the last, you can say 150 years, there's also this tension of science. Are we okay so far? Did I lose anyone? So far, so good? Cool.
I'm loving it. It's so good.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
I love you so much.
That's all good. So we've got here these 4 questions, right? And then you can just all of a sudden tell that we're going to open a can of worms when we sort of open each one of these up, right? And they all have, and this is what I love about studying philosophy and studying religion, studying science, they all have real life implication, right? So for example, somebody who's a practicing Christian, so I've got a lot of friends who are close to me are Catholics. Can they be with somebody who is a mad agnostic or an atheist, right? That is that sort of disagreement with the eschatological question, right? Some of them can't. I have close friends who are Hindus, who go to the temple like every Sunday, right? And they go there, they do their meditations, etc. So these sort of questions are all dealing with philosophy. Now, those questions have then turned into what's called disciplines, right? Disciplines or subjects. Now, these disciplines and subjects in philosophy are primarily 5, right? One is metaphysics. It's like, dude, slow down. What the heck is metaphysics? So many words, right? Well, we all know physics. Yeah, physics is a branch of science. Metaphysics is that which goes beyond physics. What does it mean to go beyond physics? Well, if we're studying space and time, then we know that time is something that you calculate with. You calculate physics, for example, you study time and you've got a watch, etc. But then metaphysics asks the question, is time real, right? So recently I was doing, please don't follow me, I was doing 130 in a country road and I copped a fine. 110 zone, I copped a fine. And the officer came to me and they're like, do you know what speed you're doing? And I said, no, I don't, officer, I'm sorry. And they said, 130 kilometers an hour. And I said, well, that's interesting. But then I wanted to be a smart ass and started asking the question, well, is time real? How are you measuring that? Yeah. Is your instrument calibrated? But then I know I was going to, go through a wormhole. So I didn't want to continue on with that. So the first branch is metaphysics. And metaphysics, to really simplify it, is in three areas. One is the study of cosmology. I did mention to those latecomers that these notes will be available later for you, and I'll save them and send it to you. Second one is ontology, and the third one being theology or divinity. Yeah. So cosmology is really about the study of the universe, the cosmos. Yeah. The cosmos is this vast, constantly expanding understanding of what we understand space, time, planets, galaxies to be, right? Planet Earth, solar system, the Milky Way, one galaxy among many galaxies. What's interesting, and I always found this really fascinating. I was a bit of a nerd when I was young, and particularly because I come from like a South Asian background, so my parents are always wanting to make me a nerd. They sent me to astronomy summer school when I was in year 8 at Melbourne University, or University of Melbourne, as they call it. And what was really interesting was that they were explaining to these sort of 13, 14-year-olds that the universe is constantly expanding. And if we go back in time, we can see that it started from a particular point, right? And there was this big bang that happened. And we know that because of, well, number one, the Hubble telescope. Hubble telescope was able to see a lot of stars, right? But then using, in physics, what's called the Doppler effect. If you haven't checked it out, it's probably something you have to know for section 3. Check out the Doppler effect. And this idea that there's red shift and blue shift, there's this idea that things that are moving further away from us has a particular color, and things that are moving closer to us has a particular color. So they understood from taking this photo through the Hubble telescope that everything was moving constantly distant from one another. And using this Doppler effect, the universe was constantly expanding. So that's what we understand through astronomy and astrophysics. But metaphysics asks the question, what is the universe expanding to? Was there space there to begin with? Is it creating space as it's expanding? What is there outside space, right? So all of a sudden, it really messes up with your mind and you go, oh, holy crap, excuse my language, but there is something deeper that goes beyond physics. Yeah. So cosmology studies that. Ontology, welcome aboard, Emma. Ontology, right, and ontological understanding is the study of being, right? What does it mean to be, right? We're called human beings, right? Why not just humans? We can call ourselves humans. Why do we have to be a human? What does it mean to be a human? And that really is that purposeful question, once again, that ontological question. What does it mean to be? And this comes down to metaphysics. So it's about being, but also beyond being, there's also becoming. What do I mean by that? So, for example, there are beings and there's becoming. Being is, I'm a human being, right? But then what am I becoming? If we believe in theory of evolution, for example, we've evolved to be a certain point in time, then what are we becoming, right? Or I was born as a baby, except for, Mike Tyson, who was born a man. There's a whole bunch of jokes about Mike Tyson, but anyway, let's not get there. There's a question of being that I was a child, then became a teenager, but I'm constantly becoming something with time, right? So ontology is the study of being, and henology is the study of becoming. Okay? And then we've got this idea of theology, which is the question of divine or divinity, study of theos, right? Dios in Spanish, Dio in French, hence Christian Dio, right? The Christian God. Great perfumes they make, by the way. So we've got here theology. And so these three things really, I guess, define what metaphysics is. And if you really want to take it a notch further, you can actually define metaphysics in this way. Onto, right? Heno, right? chrono because being and existence, you need to exist in the dimension of time, right? Things take up space and time. So chrono is about time, onto is about being, heno is about, the one or becoming, and then it's about the study of phenomena. Like all of this is about existence, right? Phenomenology. It's a mouthful. I know it's a mouthful. Onto, heno, chrono, phenomenology, because you're studying phenomena, you're studying time, which is something you study in physics as well. You're studying becoming and you're studying being. It's almost like, when we're studying medicine and there are people who do ENT specialization. So once you sit the GAMSAT, you're going to go be ear, nose, throat specialist. They call it otorhinolaryngology, right? Which is the study of ear, nose, and throat. So in a similar way, I really love the etymology of words, the history of words. Similar way, that's summarized to what is metaphysics. Yeah. If that's metaphysics, then comes the second part of philosophy, which is epistemology. I'm just breaking it right down to simplify things. So people use these words, metaphysical, epistemological, anything above a 3-syllable word scares me. So I generally try to break it down so I understand what the heck they're talking about. So epistemology is what's called the study of knowledge. Yeah. How do we know what we know? Yeah. What we know. If metaphysics is about existence, then epistemology is how do we know what we know? So for example, a metaphysical question can be, say for example, does a cup of coffee exist, right? This is a cup of coffee. Excuse my bad drawing. Say you ordered a cappuccino, yeah? Metaphysics will look at its definition, yeah, and its description. The question of being, the question of existence, yeah? So definition and description. Epistemology will look at how do we know this is the case, right? How do we know that this is a cup of coffee? So for example, the definition of a cup of coffee. Let's start with what makes a cup of coffee, right? Say, for example, there's hot chocolate here on top. There is hot water. There is sugar. I'm not going to bother writing the chemical equation for sugar. There is ground coffee. Yeah. What else is there? There's milk for those who like it with like a latte. Yeah. So over here, we've got lots of things that make up a cup of coffee. Yeah. Now, if I was to take away, say, for example, the hot powdered chocolate on top, it would still be a cup of coffee, right? It would still be a cappuccino, for example. If I was to take away the sugar, it would still be a cup of coffee. If I was to take away the milk, it would still be black coffee, right? Even if I was to take away the water, the ground coffee beans that's here would still be a cup of coffee, right? So the definition is based on this ground coffee. And this is called the essence of something. When we talk about essence, like essential oils, what are we talking about? What is the essential question? It's that which gives it its definition. Yeah. The description. So for example, hot water, it's sweet, it's sugary, right? It's milky. It's got hot chocolate on it. These are what's called attributes. Yeah. Attributes. So the essence of an iPhone, for example, is its phone call making ability. When it doesn't have a phone call making ability, it might as well just be another tablet or an iPhone or iPod Touch or something like that. Yeah. Now, the funny thing is, the attributes of it cannot exist necessarily without the essence. Yeah, in metaphysics. So for example, if I was to call it a red car, excuse my bad drawing, but imagine this is a red car. Yeah. Now this car is a car, we know, because it looks like a car, drives like a car, and that redness is the attribute, right? The redness cannot exist without the car existing. So the attributes needs to necessarily have the essence to exist. This is what's called a necessary existence, right? It necessarily needs to exist. But how do we know all of this? How do we know this is hot, this is sweet, this is sugary? We know this through our, for example, sense experience, yeah? What we can see, taste, touch, hear, smell. Takes us back to year 7 science class, the scientific method, yeah? Sense, experience. So in terms of epistemology, what we know, right? We can know something through our sense experience, our 5 senses. We can know things, for example, through our rationality and reasoning. And this is called logic, using logical rules to be able to reason our way through, right? Or rationality. Some say that we can know things through intuition, like mother's intuition, right? I don't know, Michael, you have to tell me if there's a father's intuition as well. But women's intuition, for example, that my wife always reminds me, right? There are things that we know, for example, through dreams that people may say that maybe it's our psychology, maybe it's a construction of our subconscious that comes into play. Then there are those that say, well, there's also revelation, right? This sort of spiritual, metaphysical experience that we understand. So epistemology is all about knowing something and how we know something, right? It is the study of knowledge. Episteme is the study of knowledge, right? Or epistemology is the study of knowledge. Episteme is to know. What's also interesting is that which is knowable, right, are these, yeah? These are generally called what Immanuel Kant, this famous German philosopher, calls phenomenon or phenomena, yeah? And there's those that are not knowable, that we don't know. By the way, I will let me know when to finish, and then, we can sort of answer questions. Not knowable, they call it noumena, yeah? Things that we don't know. The unknown unknowns, for example, it's not knowable. But these are some of, I guess, the ways that we can understand epistemology. So if there is metaphysics, which is the study of nature of being and cosmology and God, epistemology is about knowing, right? It's about knowing how we know what we know. So for example, when somebody says, I'm a theist, that God exists, right? Or for example, somebody says, an atheist, that God doesn't exist. God is not the case that God exists. Excuse my shorthand. These are what's called metaphysical claims. Yeah. What is this? A question of existence? Some an agnostic. I don't know anyone who says that, but some, especially when I've had a few beers. Agnostic is somebody who says, well, I don't know. I don't know if God exists, or God is not knowable. I don't know, right? Which is a noumenon sort of claim. These, I don't know that God exists, or I know that God exists, or I don't know God, or I know God. These are epistemological claims. Does that make sense? So far, so good? Because one's about knowledge and one's about existence. I'm about to get drug tested. You guys are hilarious. All right, cool. All right. So if that's metaphysics and epistemology, then what we come across is axiology. And axiology is the study of what's called values. So if I was to go back and called epistemology number 2 and metaphysics number 1, where are we? There we are. Then we can go to axiology and values. And the study of values, or the study of morality, you can call it. Values is actually studied in 2 ways. One is through morality, which is the study of ethics, and that's number 3. The other way values are understood. So morality, ethics, it's about, for example, right versus wrong, yeah, in many ways. And there's also good versus bad, yeah. Or you can say
the study of something that's beautiful, right? We don't really like to call it good and bad, but beautiful versus ugly, yeah? And this is really the study of aesthetics. Aesthetics. So this here is number 4. Now, believe it or not, a number of years ago, I think it has happened a few times, those who've sat the GAMSAT, one of the section 1 questions literally was word for word this question on the GAMSAT. Which of the branches of philosophy do the word values apply to? And they had metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, logic. So without even bothering to read the passage, I just went, oh yeah, B, because it's got ethics and aesthetics in it, right? So a lot of this knowledge does become helpful when you're doing section 1 even. So when we look at these, for example, ethics and aesthetics, we can then branch it out to the different schools of thought when it comes to ethics. So for example, ethics, there is such things as the ends justify the means, right? And I think you may have come across some of this. Ends justify the means, which is really the consequent, right? Or the consequent of an action decides whether it's right or wrong, right? Consequentialism. This is the school of thought of consequentialism, which is basically like, for example, when George W. Bush said, okay, we're going to attack Iraq, right? Why? Because we're going to give them freedom and democracy. And as long as we get rid of this big bad leader called Saddam Hussein, who was in charge of Iraq at the time, it doesn't matter how many people die in the process because the ends justify the means. So 1 million people can die, but as long as we get rid of a big bad leader and bring them democracy, we can justify it. Yeah. I'm just having a look at these kind of questions here. If there's any comments, please forgive me for not checking. Do I mean agnostic? Okay, cool. Michael, please turn the mic on and please speak if I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. Another one is, for example, duty-based ethics. Duty-based ethics are things that, for example, that the ends don't justify the means, but in every step of the process, you have a duty to be ethical, to be moral, right? And this is really what's called deontology, or consequentialism is one, and deontology is another, which is duty-based ethics. Now, you can say, well, ethics is, often objective because we're now studying ethics, but then people's morality is subjective. So, for example, some of my friends who are vegans or veg would say, well, it's unethical to kill an animal to eat it. And other friends who I have love steaks, and they say, well, no, it's completely fine and totally moral. Yep. Thanks, Michael, for the heads up. To be a moral...
Can I just make something clear to the value? I just want to make clear to people, the value in this is you can consider each of these different, not paradigms, but things like consequentialism or deontology, axiology, metaphysics, epistemology. Understanding what these things mean allows you to use them like lenses. So, for example, you might have a point, just any point on GAMSAT and be able to make a logical argument, and that might be sufficient to get you in the 60s. But then to consider the point that you have, where am I? Consider the point that you have as a deontological claim or a metaphysical claim, or to identify that a consequentialist might think this, or to show how different people might varyingly come up with different perspectives on it. Additionally, you'll also notice in the prompts that the prompts tend to be very different. They'll all look inwards at the same thing, or if you're looking at an ISAR set anyway. But they'll come at it from different angles. And your ability to understand and tease out what feeds into their looking at those things from different angles and why they might. For example, one person might be a consequentialist. One might be a I don't know what that word is. But And one might be a metaphysical claim, might be an epistemological claim. Your ability to identify that and illustrate an awareness and an understanding of how people varyingly come up with different ideas on the same thing is an intrinsically very high scoring thing to be able to do. So while these are being presented as abstractions, and necessarily so, because there's you need to step back and see some things before you can kind of zoom in and see how it's applied. I just want to make clear to people that being able to identify that people come up with varying ideas and why they come up with varying ideas, and also to be able to characterize how that occurred by using words like axiology, metaphysics, epistemology, and using them properly is going to be an extremely high scoring thing to be able to do. And it's not only going to couch your writing in less of a linear, this is the way things objectively are, and more of a, there's many ways to appraise this situation based on the initial assumptions and ways that you're coming at it. That's going to massively lift your score. I just wanted to make that clear to people.
Okay, you know what? Let's do an activity now. I would like you to get a pen and paper out, because I'm lecturing. It doesn't really help. I want you guys to be able to solidify it into an idea. Let's think of this idea of consequentialism that I've just written out and I've highlighted with a pink box. Think of an action where the ends will justify the means, right? Think of an action where the ends will justify the means, and turn this into a contention for an essay. What do I mean by contention? It's your point of view in an essay that you're going to write, where you're going to support that the end of it will justify the means. Let me give you some examples that will help you along the way. For example, I want to be a brilliant doctor, right? In order to be a brilliant doctor, I don't just need clinical skills, which is extremely important, but I also need emotional intelligence, right? I need excellent bedside manner. I need scientific knowledge and medical knowledge. I need to be up to date with all of my, research, sort of evidence-based practice in journals and so on and so forth, medical journals. So at the end of the day, if I want to be a great doctor, if I do all of these, the end of it will justify the reason why I'm sacrificing all of my time studying these. Yeah. So that's where the end justifies the means. I want you to be able to come up with
another example with you.
Yeah, sure. So another example. Sorry, go on, Michael. Yeah.
Can I suggest one? I just want to see if I myself have got the right idea. So an end or a mean that we might, or the means that came to my mind was, let's say, killing animals for the purpose of food, and the end is feeding people. So would it be true to say that feeding people justifies killing animals? Would that be an end that justifies that means? Or would that be a consequentialist perspective? And opposite that would be a deontological perspective, would be we have a duty-based ethics to preserve life and minimize harm.
Right.
And depending on how you appraise that situation, you might variously come up with that either killing animals is objectively unjustifiable, or you might just circle straight back to being a consequentialist and say, no, we need to eat, and that's the most convenient way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be good, except with the deontological perspective, they may say, well, it's a duty for us not necessarily to just eat, but also preserve. So, okay, as long as we have sustainable farms and so on and so forth, then we're doing something ethical. We can still have our steaks, but we can still make sure that the animals do live on and we're not wiping out a species, if that makes sense. But definitely, like one of the reasons, for example, consequentialist example, and a common one that's studied in philosophy is capital punishment. Is it okay to kill repeat offenders who are doing, gruesome murders and crime, somebody who's committing genocide, for example, to give them capital punishment? Is that justice? Places, in North Korea and USA and other countries where they do have capital punishment would say, yes, it is justifiable, right? To give the death penalties to someone who's committed gruesome crimes. So I want you to be able to come up with a contention, right? And see if you can do it. And share it. Please share it on the chat. Are you able to see the chat on the screen, by the way?
I can. I presume everyone else can.
Everyone else can. So let's come up with a contention.
Hey, can I just check? So I didn't see how you ended up with morally subjective on the page, but I'm assuming that that would be a consequentialist view of things, whereas a deontological claim would be that there is objective morality. Is that correct?
Well, no, because consequentialism and deontology, they're both schools of ethics, and they're both objective schools of ethics, i.e., it presents an argument and it's an objective idea. More subjective idea is basically anything that you say. So, for example, I find it moral subjectively to be able to allow my children to drink at the age of 8 or age of 4, drink alcohol, for example, right? Why? Because everyone should have the autonomy to do so and the freedom to do so. And really, if you don't allow people under 18 to drink, it's ageism. That's what it is. It's a form of discrimination. Right. So that's a subjective morality that you've constructed. But objective is something that everybody agrees. So, for example, majority of people would agree it's not okay to murder innocent people. Right. There's a fine line between objective and subjective here. Has anybody writing out?
Yeah, someone's just popped one in the chat. The gross overpollution of the planet's atmosphere due to the massive amounts of rocket fuel displacement is a justifiable consequence in the pursuit of interplanetary development for the human race.
Planet's atmosphere due to massive amounts of rocket fuel displacements. Yeah, it's a nice one. Nice one, Harry. Leaking confidential documents can be in the public interest. Excellent, Charlotte. That's really good too. Right, like WikiLeaks, for example, or Snowden, where for the public interest, for the greater good, it's okay to do something illegal now, quote unquote illegal. But then who constructs law, right? Is it the powerful? Is it the powerless? So all these different questions come into mind. So we've got some of those examples. The efficacy of democracy should be prioritized when considering things as one. Yeah, efficacy of democracy should be prioritized when considering things as one. What do you mean by one, Fadi? That's an interesting question. Patrick says, conducting clinical trials on mice prior to human trial for treatment of diseases. Yeah, that's good, Patrick. That's a good start. It's not a complete sentence, though. So conducting clinical trials on mice prior to human trials for treatment is ethical or is justifiable, right? That's one. Capital punishment should be outlawed as it propagates and promotes violence in society. Thank you, Sandra. Excellent. Just to be clear, we're writing a contention from consequentialist perspective. That's right, Hashfi, that's correct. Similar to cost-benefit analysis in economics. Yes, it is. It's really interesting you mentioned that because I was gonna come to that, KT. So what consequentialism does is basically, I'll quickly explain KT's question there, is that consequentialism, like one of the schools of consequentialism is called utilitarianism. Yeah, utilitarianism. It's a funky word. Tarianism, which is this idea that everybody gets satisfaction from something. So, for example, if I eat chocolate, I'll get maybe 100 brownie points of satisfaction. Yeah. If I have a car, I'll have 1,000 points of satisfaction, right? So what utilitarianism is this idea of the sum of all utilities, of all satisfaction of all people. So democracy, or majoritarian democracy, is like the election that we have in Australia, for example, that's coming up, is basically where majority wins. Yeah. Now, when majority wins, what are we saying? We're saying the ends justify the means. It doesn't matter how we consider the minority, but given that we've added the sum of all satisfaction of all majority people, they're going to have the right of say when it comes to making decisions in the parliament. Yeah. Now, in economics, what we do is we take the sum of all costs and we take all the sum of all benefits or profits, and we say, well, if all the profits and benefits outweigh the sum of costs, right, then it's something that's worthwhile doing. For example, if it's beneficial that we can actually open up all the borders and not have lockdowns, because our healthcare system, and there's a public health or public health economics question, our hospitals are able to, for example, cater for everyone else, then it's okay to not have lockdowns, because the amount of people that will end up in a coma, the sum of all costs, are actually far less than all the benefits that the economic decisions will make, right? We can also have it the other way, which is, well, guess what? More people in a coma, the hospitals can't cope, and therefore we need a lockdown, right? This is a cost-benefit analysis in economics. And literally, this is how governments make decisions, right? In departments. It's not about how many lives we're losing. It's not about, human beings, how many deaths we're having. Literally, it's about whether the hospitals and the social costs and the economic costs outweigh the benefits or not.
So can I give Nosh the classic example of utilitarianism, where, as it's commonly described, there's a train car with 20 people headed off a cliff, and you have the ability to divert that train car onto a different track, but tied to that track is one person who will die as a result of being run over by the train car, but the other 20 will survive. A utilitarianist or a consequentialist will support moving the track, killing the person, because you will save 20 and you're plus 19 people. But then other people who perhaps more of an absolutist, or would it be right to say, Nosh, a more deontological view of things would be that is unjustifiable from that framework?
That's correct. The deontological would be every life matters, and it doesn't matter the number of people or the sum of the number of people, but killing one person is like killing humanity, right? And saving one person is like saving humanity.
And for your task, particularly task B, but in general section 2 essays, utilitarianism in particular is a very useful thing, because within utilitarianism, and feel free to correct me, Nosh, if I'm off, but I understand you can refer to or consider the utilitarian calculus or the hedonic calculus that feeds into people's behavior. So for example, I might have an essay and maybe my narrative is about being bullied in school. And I might consider the utilitarian calculus that feeds into their behavior. And instead of going, no, this person's objectively bad, they wronged me, I might get curious about, why did that person do that? Maybe it wasn't a malicious assault on my very being, but maybe they were trying to preserve their power or their status in a power dynamic in a high school. And, they weighed up their benefits and ultimately they, prioritize themselves over me. And I can understand why they would do that. I didn't do it. And your ability to empathize with people and not just people, mind you, in task B, you might consider in a task A essay about democracy and perhaps communism or socialism, or the predicates of socialism, communism, and what feeds into the socialist instinct, or rather, how was the transition, the often bloody transition to communism, justified, for example, in post-Russian Revolution or by Mao Zedong, in which innumerable people were killed, but it was justified by the promise of the communist utopia. And that's well, actually, you corrected me on this, didn't you, Nosh? Did you say that wasn't a utilitarianist perspective?
Yeah, look, there's a big difference of opinion here, and we'll perhaps get to that. We'll get to that because this will make sense once we sort of move on. But let's hold on to that point. Let's hold on to that point, and we'll come back to it. How about that? Does anybody have any questions so far? I'll turn my cam on so we can see everyone. Questions, comments, feel free to turn your mic on. By the way,
move on, by the way, from Axiology, can you do on one page like a tree diagram of how these things, basically all the prisms through which you might consider any particular claim or prompt in the GAMSAT? So far we've got metaphysics, epistemology, axiology. Just want to see it in one tree for people to. Yeah, sure. So
the way I would look at it is, if there's a GAMSAT question that comes up, okay, if the question that you want to ask or you want to, I guess, research about, if it's about existence or it's about nature of definition, for example, like an essay that comes up and says, the theme is love, right? And we can start looking at, okay, what are the types of love? What are the definitions of love? Like I love my wife and I love my dog. If I love my dog like I love my wife, I've got issues. But you know what I mean? So if we're going to talk about love and the definition and the existence of love, then, for example, look at metaphysics. Yeah. If it's a question about knowledge, it's about knowing anything, knowing history, knowing economics. How do we know, for example, that a tree is there and it's not communicating to us? How do we know through using of science? How do we know through the use of any sort of sense perception, psychology, for example, right? Anything to do with knowing and knowledge, what I would generally do is use the word epistemic or epistemological question. Yeah, epistemological question, right? If it's a question, once again, about, say, politics, morality, values, this would be, once again, about ethics and the ethical question, and then the different schools of ethics, once again, in different areas of metaphysics. For example, do we have a duty, or do the ends justify the means? Depending on the different schools of thought. If it's a question on art, if it's a question on, for example, beauty, right, and this is what we're going to get to, this would be aesthetics and aesthetical experience, right? So any further questions here? Michael, do you mind just responding to any sort of chats that are coming on, just so I can get through?
My best, mate. I'm not you, but see if I can stem the tide.
Does that make sense for people? Yeah. So you can throw any topic, right? And literally you can use this framework to be able to look at questions. A topic may come up, something that came up in the past and regularly comes up, happiness. It came up, I think, twice in like 7 years or something. Marriage. I'm talking about section 2 here, by the way. Marriage, pets and animals, right? So when we talk about happiness, what is the meaning and purpose of life and the existence and meaning? Once again, you can link it to metaphysics, right? How do we know we're happy? You can link it to epistemology. That is it really a subjective experience, or is there something objective about happiness? Is there a happiness index? For example, I think Bhutan is a country that refuses to judge welfare through GDP, gross domestic product. What they have is a national happiness index. Yeah. Question of marriage, right? This can come into an ethical question, questions about gay marriage, questions about what is the ethical step for a husband or a wife or a partner to be able to deal with. Yeah. The question on pets, once again, is it really my dog that I'm looking after and I'm taking for a walk, or is the dog taking me for a walk? I don't know, certainly there are a lot of cats who are very self-centered in their universe, and it feels like we're the pet and they're not, right? So a lot of these questions, no matter what theme comes up, you can use this sort of a framework. Yeah. What else do we have? Cool. Is that okay so far? Shall I continue? Yes, no, shut up, I'm bored.
Yes, it's good. Just let's keep it relevant to
all right, cool.
Relevant, but to balancing theory with application as much as you can.
Yep, that's fine. So we've got aesthetics here, right? And what's interesting about aesthetics is the fact that we can talk about art. What makes art art? What is art and what is not art? So some say, well, there needs to be an artist intentionality. I'm like, okay, fair enough. But then when we see a beautiful sunrise, right? You climb the mountain, you see a beautiful sunrise. Isn't that a form of art, that you're capturing beauty? Like, what is more amazing than going through a journey, traveling the world, and really experiencing the vast cosmos and the nature that exists around us, to be able to capture it and then speak about it. And this is really where, for example, language comes in, right? Which is a second part of, or you can say the humanities, right? So anything to do with beauty, anything to do with art, anything to do with perfection, right, comes down to aesthetics in the GAMSAT topics. Sometimes, you probably have seen passages on aesthetics in the GAMSAT. What's interesting though, is when you're looking at aesthetics, often whatever is beautiful, or whatever is sort of reaching an end of perfection, say for example, engineering, the design of an engineering building, right? Architectural building or a bridge. Someone would say, well, wow, that's a work of art, right? Say somebody who does perfect plastic surgery using the golden ratio, right? And you study the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequence, dentists study it, plastic surgeons study it, etc. They would look at it and they would have to study aesthetic proportionality, right? So all of this comes under the area of aesthetic and aesthetic value and aesthetic beauty. And what becomes interesting is that when we talk about beauty, is beauty in the eye of the beholder, i.e., is it subjective? Or is it objective? This is one technique that you can always use as a tool up your sleeve when you're running out of ideas. For example, they throw an idea of particularly task B, right? Hope, love, generosity. Is generosity, does it have a subjective definition? I.e., anyone can be generous depending on the act? Or is it about giving away what you love, an objective definition? For example, money, time, knowledge, things that you have to give up in order to come up with something, right? So any ideas that you run out of, you can use this tool, subjective versus objective. And a history of Western philosophy, a lot of it is a clash between a subjective and objective. Subjective meaning personal or relative, right? And objective meaning independent of the observer. Independent of the observer, right? So some people may have an objective experience, i.e., everyone can see a Mercedes-Benz and it's white. Some people may find that really beautiful. Other people may find it ugly. So that objective experience is that knowing that that exists and it's there. But then subjective experience is this idea that, well, I don't know if I like it or not, right? If it's good or bad. So if, for example, we believe in a world that all there is really five senses and sensorial knowledge, i.e., outside the scientific framework, right? Outside scientific framework or scientific knowledge, there is no other way of knowing. All we have is what we can see, taste, touch, hear, smell. This worldview is called positivism. Yeah. Or the idea that science can explain all the questions in the world and we don't need philosophy or we don't need religion is called scientism. And this claim is really just an epistemological claim. Epistemological claim, right? You cannot make a value judgment. You cannot make a judgment like, oh, this is beautiful, or this is ugly. Why? Because then you run into subjective problems. All you can do is say if something exists by your five senses. And there are limits to that, right? Positive knowledge. For example, scientists haven't figured out what is consciousness, right? The question of God, the question of anything that goes beyond what we can see, taste, touch, hear, smell, etc. Right? Doesn't that mean that ethics is also a branch of aesthetics? Actually, ethics and aesthetics are both branches. I think to Fadi, I'm answering the question, is they're both from axiology, right? If that makes sense, because of subject or objective depending on your values. Well, you see, ethics can be understood subjectively, but it could also be understood objectively, which is why they exist in axiology and values. Right? It's difficult to come to a logical argument and through a logical argument say, no, this is beautiful. Mona Lisa is beautiful because of A, B, and C, right? If that makes sense. Any other questions? Shall we continue? Are you guys getting bored? Let me know when to stop.
No, you're good, bro. Keep going.
Cool.
I never stop.
Cool. Okay. So what I'll do instead of doing here, so if philosophy is part of it that we went through, right? So human beings wonder, they question. We have this ability to have this intellect that differentiates us from other human beings. Differentiates us from other beings, other existence, whether it's animals, trees, inanimate objects, etc. But also there is this notion of language. Human beings have something which others don't, which is a complex language. Now, some scientists say, well, dolphins can communicate, apes and monkeys and so on and so forth can communicate, but not to the extent that human beings have complexity in language, right? And language can affect human beings. So human beings are not only just intellectual animals and rational animals, but we're also linguistic animals. What does it mean to be a linguistic animal? There was a story of an old Indian sage, right? He would use sort of like Vedantic medicine, right? Based on Hinduism, Ayurvedic medicine, etc., but also medicine using language. He would heal people, sort of the ancient medicine, using language, right? And a famous story goes that a English doctor during the period of colonialism went and visited this healer and said, what kind of doctor are you? You must be a quack, like you must be a fake charlatan, because you're not doing any evidence-based practice. You're not checking for prognosis, diagnosis, and so on and so forth, the medical system. And this doctor said, you don't think I can use words to heal people? And the healer said, you don't think I can use words to heal people? And the doctor said, no. And so the Indian healer, this sage, this guru said, well, you're a monkey and your mother is a pig. And this doctor was really pissed off. His blood pressure went high, he turned red, he was aggressive. And he said, look what I did. I just used 2 words and I'm seeing physical changes in your body. So who says that I can't use good language to be able to heal you in other ways? The human beings have a capacity to heal themselves. All you have to do is get out of the way. Right. So that is, I mean, I don't know if it's a true story, but I thought it was a pretty interesting story. So I wanted to share that with you. But languages are very interesting. Philosopher Wittgenstein, who comes from Germany and is a 20th century philosopher, and this is something you can always use in an essay as a quote, that he said, language, right? Language is the house of being. What does that mean? It means that in order to exist, in order to be, right? I need to know it. And the only way of knowing it and expressing that knowledge is through language. For example, how do you know 2 + 2 is equal to 4 without the language of mathematics, right? How do you know that somebody may have cancer without being able to express what cancer is or the word means, right? So language is always there and it's extremely important. And there are different types of languages, right? I'm not just talking about English and Mandarin and Cantonese and, those sort of languages. Of course, those are languages, but there's also body language. Let's say communication is 80% body language. Excuse me. There is computer languages like C++ and R and Python, etc. There is mathematics, there's logic, there's Braille, right? And sign languages for those that are visually impaired and so on and so forth. So all these languages make us who we are. And this is really about linguistic animals, right? So a question about human being or human nature or what does it mean to love come in. They say, can there be love, for example, as a contention, without language existing? What do we mean by the word love? What do we mean by the word capitalism? Can we even begin to explain and define capitalism without language, right? At the very fundamental level. And this is why it's so important for us to study grammar. If you want to write a critique of modern society and modern education, for example, the fact that we don't learn grammar anymore. Grammar stops you from making mistakes in your language, just like, or your speech, right? Stops you from making mistakes in your speech or language, just like logic stops you from making mistakes in your thoughts. And these are very important for us to know, right? The ancients, for example, ancient Greek curriculum was based on what was called I forget the word for it. Basically, in primary school, they used to study grammar, logic, and what's called rhetoric, right? Rhetoric is the idea of persuasion, right? And then in high school, they would study things like arithmetic, geometry, astronomy to understand their place in the world, and acoustics. That's right. This is called trivium, and this is called quadrivium. So if you're writing an essay, for example, based on a critique of the modern education system or the modern world, we say that today we have a generation of TikTokers, we have a generation of Instagram, where we don't really engage with arguments in a deep level. It may be a very small, soundbite sized knowledge, yet we don't have the knowledge of logic, the knowledge of grammar that allows us to articulate meanings in precise ways, right? That we've gone and lost the meaning of what it really means to be educated or to be knowledgeable, for example. And in the ancient Greek system, we see grammar, logic, rhetoric, trivium that existed. It wasn't just ancient Greek. It was the Romans, it was the Islamic Empire, it was the Hindu education system, it was the Buddhist, some of the first universities that used to exist in places like Myanmar and places like Morocco today. They used to study these subjects, right? What's the link here? This idea similar to Plato's allegory of the caves. Which idea is that? If I can just engage.
The cave, I only know like briefly. Fraser talked about it, but it's basically like it's the idea of if you're chained in a cave, and you can see the wall ahead of you, and behind you people are walking past with fire and various light sources. You only see your shadow on the wall and various distortions. If you never
Sorry, Michael. I'm gonna stop you there. I know the cave. I'm talking about what idea does it relate to? I wrote a 5,000 word mini thesis on it, but what are we talking about here? Which idea?
So they're basically saying is the language, or maybe that person can come off mute and say, but they asked it at the time that you're talking about language.
Language. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Mate, you just lil broed me so hard.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry.
It's very enjoyable. I quite like it. No, please.
No. For those, feel free to share it. I mean, many people may not know the example.
I bet Fadi enjoyed that. I'm always lil broing him, and you're doing it to me. So. No, let's continue with this. I don't think it's
continue on. Okay,
that's relevant to everyone. Might be.
So we've got this idea of language and literature as well, because literature is often like the use of language to be able to come up with texts, right? And what do I mean by texts? I'm talking about not only novels and books, but I'm also talking about films. I'm talking about music. I'm talking about anything that can be analyzed from the author to the reader or the viewer, right? So when we talk about literature and text analysis, novels, films, music, these sort of work, poetry, etc., often reflects society, and then society is also reflected in literature. It reflects ideas in society and also reflected in literature. So, for example, when we're watching films, The Matrix, right, talking about metaphysics, for example, what is real, Neo? Yeah, what is not real? When we're talking about Dark Knight Rises, yeah, we're talking about specific theories of chaos and so on and so forth. Yeah. And how do we then go about this in understanding society? So literature, for example, George Orwell's 1984, for those who've read it, it's a critique of socialism, communism, Marxism. Yeah. And what's actually more impressive to me is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. He wrote a book called Brave New World, which is actually more relevant to today because that's a critique of liberal democracies. So, for example, we're like, oh my God, look at North Korea. Look at the way the government, is controlling everyone in Saudi Arabia, right? But then what about metadata? What about, I forget who mentioned it, but was talking about, making information publicly available that is classified, right? Metadata and surveillance capitalism. This is a buzzword that is really good to know. What is surveillance capitalism? It's an economic system. Well, firstly, what is capitalism? Economic system based on private property. So I'll just write it here. Based on private property, right? Where we exchange, you know what? Can I write it like this using some scientific nerdy terminology? Exchange, yeah, like a delta. Exchange, right, in market economies or in markets, goods and services. What are we exchanging? Goods and services. So we're buying and selling goods, buying and selling services, etc. That's really what the real sort of, I guess, the root of capitalism is. It's an economic system where we exchange in markets, goods and services, where people own private properties. But we now live in an age of what's called late capitalism. Yeah. Late capitalism goes beyond this idea of capitalism, of just this. Late capitalism, what's called corporatism. It's where corporations are killing competitions, right? What happens in capitalism? It's a free market society. Yeah. Free market society where anyone can come in and sell their goods and services in a market. Say, for example, Vic Market, you can come up, put a stall there. Corporatism actually makes stuff so cheap that no one else can compete. And any other competition that comes in, they just buy them out. Like, oh yeah, Facebook, guess what? We want to just buy out WhatsApp, and they did. Oh, Instagram's doing well, let's just buy them out. And it kills competition. At the same time, Facebook takes all the information off you, and I bet you any money, all of a sudden we're going to start getting ads of surveillance capitalism on TikTok and WhatsApp. Yeah, just because we're talking about it, right? So this is how surveillance capitalism works. This late capitalism works, where we're being watched in everything that we do. They're taking our data, they're following our GPS system, right? What we buy, where we go, our Fitbit, and so on and so forth. Then what about privacy? Then what about our idea of having this autonomy, of this individualism that exists? And this is really threatening the liberal democracies. And this is what Huxley talks about in Brave New World. If you don't want to read the book, YouTube it. There's a 10-minute animated summary of it. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Could surveillance capitalism identify, disrupt bill that was passed through Australia Parliament? Identify and disrupt. Yeah, you could. Miriam, perhaps you could explain it better than me. But definitely it's there. And the more we go on with this sort of late capitalism and postmodern societies, we are seeing more and more of this happening, metadata, data, etc., which is generally why I'm not on Facebook. So I apologize if everyone has been asking me questions. I don't check it. I should check it more often. I will check it just because of this group. So where are we? We've actually covered a fair bit here in terms of literature and text and language. And then there's religion and the arts, right? The arts, for example, once again, it comes down to, there can be visual arts, there can be performing arts, right? And a lot of people don't see value in arts. I certainly didn't. When I was a science maths nerd all the way through high school, I'd be like, why are we learning music? Why is it compulsory to do this arty-farty stuff? Philosophy, what the heck? What point is there for philosophy in this world? Then I got to university and I got absolutely schooled while I went through an existential crisis. And I was like, wow, okay. I seem to understand now the place and the role and the importance of it, because without arts, without philosophy, there wouldn't be any ethics. And without ethics, there wouldn't be any accountability of government. There wouldn't be any accountability of making decisions in hospitals, right? So there is a very important role for it. And there's an important role for us to study politics. Yeah, because without politics, you see, every society has politics, right? Let's just quickly do a wrap of politics. Right? Every society has politics. Some has good politics, some has bad politics, but there's no society without politics, right? Everybody votes in this country. When I ask this question to a lot of people, right? Are you political? Are you invested? They'll say, no, I'm not really political. I'm apolitical. You see, apolitical is one of the most political statements that you can make. You're basically saying you're fine with everything going in the government. is doing whatever they're doing. I don't really give a shit. And because I don't give a shit, I'm happy with the way it's going. Now, that's a political position you're taking, whether you realize it or not. And if you're not doing the thinking for yourself, using philosophy, using reasoning, then someone else will be doing the thinking for you, right? That's an important point. If you're not doing the thinking yourself intellectually, then someone else will be doing the thinking for you, right? When you look at the Holocaust, for example, many of the Jewish communities in Germany said, yeah, it's fine, it would never get that bad. We're all Germans, right? But someone else was doing the thinking for them, ideology, right? Which was the beginning of a genocide. Similarly, with a whole bunch of different ideas that exist, right? There's misogyny, there's a literal hatred of women, which many of the societies promote. Unhealthy patriarchy, for example, and feminism comes out of that. And there's a high, grade of domestic violence, and those who work in ED and ER can testify to that domestic violence and what we're seeing in emergency departments, women being subjected to as a result of drunkenness of their partners and so on and so forth. When it comes to racism, right? Black Lives Matter, for example. When it comes to Islamophobia, the way, for example, women in hijabs are on the street treated was far worse after September 11, for example, than it is now, but still there is an element that exists there. So politics is all around us, and we need to be able to study and understand what it is. So then what do we understand politics to be? Politics is really the study of power, right? Study of power, systems, and government. Now, in many ways, when we start talking about politics as a study of power, system, and government, then power can come in many ways, right? There is, believe it or not, there's a power struggle going on here, depending on what you believe in. When I'm teaching, who gives me the authority to speak, right? So there's a powerful dynamics in the classroom. Yeah. There is people say, oh, I'm so workplace or office politics, right? So there's politics in the office, in the workplace. Yeah. There's politics happening everywhere because there's a power struggle that happens at places. Systems of government, right? How do we understand, for example, a monarchy, absolute monarchy, right? Anarchy, a way that there is no government, right? We all sit together and hang out together. And humanity historically never had this form of government, right? So monarchy, anarchy, right? You can talk about, for example, theocracy, the idea of a religion ruling, theo, right? God. Democracy, demos, right? People ruling, right? You can talk about autocracy, autocrats, which is a class-based system. There's a class of people that rule, right? Systems that exist in politics, for example. Then you've got types of government, right? There is, for example, and this is really the boring stuff of politics that I don't really like talking about. It's like representative government. Well, who the heck chose Scott Morrison to represent me? ScoMo doesn't represent me, or anyone else doesn't necessarily represent me. I find it very difficult to vote for people, right? When it comes to election time. And people go, oh, aren't you really political? Like, why don't you vote? I'm like, I'll rather cop a fine, or I'll just go and put in a blank piece of paper. They'll be like, why? And I'll be like, well, I studied politics, that's why. But, it's quite difficult because not many people look at policies of different candidates to understand how societies are. So anything that comes up remotely, especially for task A essays, you can use a political spectrum. And one of the ideologies that I'd like to cover, if we have time, if we have time, for example, is everyone okay with me continuing, or are you guys getting exhausted, bored?
Nosh, did you want the 5-minute break and I can take questions just to mix things up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Go.
No worries.
So I'll take some questions for 5 minutes and
okay, cool.
Done.
Just I'll stop sharing and I'll be back. No worries.
If anyone else wants to break from a group, now's the time. How do I make myself pin? Oh. Well, while he's doing that, he's probably going to be about 5 minutes. Does anyone want to I can either summarize what I've heard so far, or if anyone has any questions about how that relates to section 2 or how you can use it for section 2, now would be a good time to ask.
Hi, Michael. Sorry, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. I just wanted to ask a question which was a little bit off topic, and hopefully I can get an answer from Nosh as well. But I would like to know, what is your favourite fiction and non-fiction book or books? I know it's a tough one. It's very rogue and random, but I'm just really curious.
If I had to name some fiction that I like, there's a book called Shantaram, which I quite like. I do like 1984. That is a favorite of mine. I'm like looking around at the books. I've got so many books around me. What do I like? My favorite non-fiction. Well, you're going to all laugh that it's. No, it's not great there actually. I'm just going to go with 1984. And that's like a cop-out answer. I really do like that book. The Power of Now. I read that when I was a kid. That's fun. I've got no idea what Nosh would say. Non-fiction. It depends on whether you classify religious books as non-fiction. I do, and so I would say the Quran. I don't know. I don't read books that much. I read liberally from the internet, but it's more like just articles more than anything. I find books typically to be relatively low yield ways of consuming information and learning about the world. So I am not as well read as I might be, unless it's about theology or religion. I read quite a bit about that, but I suppose you're not as interested in that as you might be. Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you just talk about the cave example?
I don't know it that well, to be honest. I'm really not the right person. But essentially the idea is Plato is saying that when people understand things from a certain paradigm, they can only understand relative to that paradigm. And it's very hard for them to kind of step back and see something from another way. And by the way, someone else jump in if you have a better idea, because I'm making this up. But the essential thing goes that if you're in a cave, you're chained and all you can see is the wall in front of you. When people walk behind you with various light sources, you will see distortions of yourself by your shadow on the wall. And you might understand that the world is, you would only know that the world is constructed of these shadows and the way that they move on the wall. And that's all you know reality to be. The idea of a light source is completely foreign to you. You don't know what that is because behind you, you never see. If someone was freed from the cave and then went outside the cave and saw the sun for the first time and realized, oh, wait on, it's that the shadows aren't real. The shadows are a function of the light coming from the sun, and they then have the real read on reality, as it were. If that person was to go back and speak to the people chained up, they would think he's crazy. And indeed, that's what happens when there were certain philosophers that got kind of various ideas or understood at another level the way the world is, or perhaps for theologians or theists. If it is indeed the case that they're right, then their read of the world will sound naturally absurd to people that aren't. But you might say Plato was a theist, for example. He believed in God based on, and so was Aristotle. Aristotle was after Plato, and Socrates, and indeed everyone from classical antiquity to late modernism believed in God on reason and ration-based arguments. But to many people today, for example, they would sound absurd in having those arguments. So Plato would say that perhaps he has come out and seen the light and seen things, or the world has been rendered to him in a way that allowed him to see what he would believe to be a truer and a more significant, meaningful version of the world. But of course, to people that hadn't seen that, they just believe the shadows are the shadows, and that's it. That's as far as I know it. But Nosh is back, and possibly. Hey, Nosh, there was a question asked about the cave. I'm not sure how relevant it is, though, to section 2. Do you know what? You should probably go and research it, because there's 80 odd people here, and I'm not sure that every single one is interested in the cave.
Plato's cave, yeah. Best thing to do, YouTube it. There's like a whole bunch of animated videos that are like 5 to 10 minutes long.
Someone asked a question, Nosh, what our favorite non-fiction and fiction book are. And there's also a question in the chat, what are the favorite sites and journals to read articles from? That depends on what I'm researching. I just read liberally from whatever Google suggests. But if you're asking for section 2, The Quadrant The Guardian, the New York Times, you should read the opinion section. They read like section 2 essays. And Nosh, you were telling me yesterday, the Conversation.
The Conversation is a website where academics write non-academic journals, but academic knowledge on them, the Conversation. What I'll do is perhaps I can post it on Facebook group, or we can share it another way, Michael, maybe through email, a list. I've got a list of places.
Oh, can you? Can you? Because I'll just add it to my, I've already got a list, and Shabir got a list, but we can do, or if you want to do a blog on, by the way, this, if you have time, or I can share a First Philosophy blog, mind you. If anyone's interested, by the way, firstphilosophy.co is something Nosh has been working on if you want to learn about more ideas there. And someone has suggested in the chat, The Atlantic also has incredible opinion pieces on every topic. Best dollars she's ever spent on a subscription.
Yes, Atlantic is great. There's another one called Aeon as well, AEON, which make really nice articles as well.
To answer your question, why do I suggest reading The Quadrant? They're horribly right-wing, and I'm not right-wing, I'm quite liberal, but it's nice to see things and to be able to appreciate things, because they're not, just rednecks. Like they're very good writers. There's obviously intelligent. They just happen to see the world on a different spin than I do. And it's good to be able to, you don't want to be trapped in your own worldview. And as a doctor, and keeping always in mind, this is a psychometric test, you want to be able to show an awareness and ability to consider, not just go, oh, I wonder what things look like from the other view, but to actually have considered and deliberated understandings of what feeds into their worldview, what kind of arguments they have. But beyond that, beyond enculturating myself to what things look like from the other side, they are extremely, not colorful, but inventive in their use of figurative language. I'll give you an example. I once read from the Quadrant the following phrase, which subsequently ended up in almost every single one of my essays. It said something like, the muddied corpse of, I don't know, democracy or whatever. It said the muddied corpse of something, democracy, was squelched into the trenches under the boot of something else. Can't remember what they said. The point was the construction. And so I would always say, oh, the muddied corpse of whatever I'm talking about was squelched into the trenches under the boot of something else I'm talking about. When you start to gather and collect and get familiar with various ways of using these figurative expressions, your writing gets more inventive and colorful and interesting. And the Quadrant is a great place to learn things like that. So that's why I picked that particular thing. And Nosh, some of my favorite fiction, non-fiction books are not relevant to GAMSAT. Yeah, bro, I was like the Quran. I don't know whether you think that's non-fiction or not, but
It's not. Yeah. No, I was just going to, I could go through a bunch of books depending on what's going to be relevant for the GAMSAT. That's why I don't want to necessarily suggest reading everything.
Honestly,
But
I don't know if I'd spend time reading books for the GAMSAT. These guys are 2 months out of their GAMSAT. Like, answer the question just because they're interested.
I wouldn't
go and read these books now, by the way.
No, I wouldn't read questions, but I would read examples of really, really well-written passages and excerpts.
Yeah, that's a good idea as well.
There's an article I can share. You know what? Let me just Google it and I'll share it with you. It was a brilliant piece of writing that's talking about subdural hematoma.
Not what I would have picked. Well, you might.
It's actually from a blog piece. Yeah. Excellent writing.
I actually kind of want to know what your favorite books are as well, bro.
Funnily enough, I'm a very, very, very slow reader, so I don't read many books.
I said the same thing. I was like, bro, I don't really read.
I love knowledge. I just don't read as much as I should. Let me see if I can find it. Where is it?
Well, just before we press on with continuing, because what you're about to get to, mind you, everyone, when I put in the group, Nosh is blowing my head, he's in my living room blowing my mind, and you guys have got to listen to this. What he was actually talking about was politics, political ideologies, where democracy and where liberalism fits into the place. And that's what we're getting to now, which is actually, I think, possibly one of the higher yield things for you guys, as Task A tends to very liberally relate to these things. But as an overview, Nosh, can we do another check-in or an overview of what we've discussed so far and how it all fits and
absolutely.
Or if not, then at the end, because I know that in your mind, what started this was saying that when you have clarity of thought, you write with clarity. And I think that's a very good point. But I know in your mind, all these are ordered and sat in a tree of some sort. And I think if we can, at the end of this, if that has been imparted, and we can each walk away with a tree of understanding all the various disciplines of humanities and social sciences and how they fit together, I think that would be a valuable takeaway.
Yeah. So what I was planning to do, and it was an ambitious project, I was just thinking with time and comments, etc., was actually to briefly explain what the humanities were and what the social sciences were. Number one. So I was only going to do two things: humanities and social sciences, and then sort of in a summary, go through history of intellectual thought in like an hour. So from history chronologically, we look at ancient civilizations, classical age, modern age, and the postmodern age. And that way we basically have the ideas of all the sort of ideas that we need to know in history of humanity, basically, or at least the movements in a very short frame time.
How much longer have you got on that? Because I imagine
I can explain that quickly. Actually, I wouldn't be able to.
We can do another one if you want to do a different session. If you want.
I was thinking maybe what we can do is today we go through what is humanities, what is social sciences, and I'll give some homework. So what I'm going to do is all the buzzwords and the funky words that we've used, and I'm going to summarize it in a table or in a dot point. I want you to look them up. Look them up in three places. One is the Wikipedia, starting point. Second is the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And the third one is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I'll write these out for you as well. And that can be homework where I would like you to come up with your own flashcards, right? Some people, it works. For some people, they want to write it down on a piece of paper. Whatever helps you to understand and memorize these words. Because this is really, it's vocabulary, but it's also ideas behind vocabulary. And there was a study done at Stanford Medical School where they looked at people's IQ and they looked at people's vocabulary, and there's a very high correlation between the two. That the CEOs, the directors of the hospitals, the consultants all have a very expansive vocabulary, right? Which is why it's important for us to be able to understand these ideas. Is that okay with you? Or would you like me to sort of summarize it, condense everything in this session because it won't be into the next one?
Just out of interest for myself, do you guys want to do a reaction? So give option one will be do it today. Option two will be do another session. Can you guys go option one, do it today, put your thumbs up, and I'll so do your reactions. Okay, so very few, we've got like 2-3 people. So can I presume that it's the case at option two? Thumbs up for option two, everyone, if you prefer to have another session. Let's just have this. Yeah, like basically everyone. All right, so that's fine. So let's wrap up this then, so it doesn't lag on. And then do whatever you need to do to finish off this bit, and then we'll tee up a time, maybe next week, same time or something like that. Whatever, I'll figure it out and put it in the group, and then we'll cap off, and then you'll just basically do the run through from chronologically to basically give all the ideas.
Yep, that's fine. So
mind you, it's what me and Shabir did, but you've done a much better job, so I'll be sure to tease him about that after this.
Well, I mean, I don't want to brag, but I taught Shabir everything about GAMSAT. Okay, Stanford Encyclopedia. I'm just putting in the links. Well, I don't have the links, but Encyclopedia of Philosophy that you can actually Google up. Okay. So where are we?
Just for the people, sorry,
far.
When I put this on YouTube, they're not going to be able to see the chat, so I'll just say it out loud. The homework was to look up the terms that he will share on Wikipedia, what's IEP? Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and third, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They are the three things.
So just I guess a word of warning. So Wikipedia is very user friendly. IEP is actually more intermediate, but it's still quite user friendly. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is very academic. So if Wikipedia and IEP is sufficient, don't bother going to SEP. But if you want to go into real sort of deep, rigorous analysis and you have that intellectual curiosity, by all means go for SEP. The articles are written by philosophers. Some of them are written by my professors that I've studied with from various universities, Cambridge, Harvard, La Trobe, Monash, etc. So that's more rigorous, but you don't necessarily need to be that rigorous to write well. But once again, the deeper you go, the better you better prepared you're going to be. So it's up to you what you want. Just to recap, so what we started with is we talked about the humanities and we talked about the social sciences, right? Or we're talking about them. We started off with philosophy. So I'll just turn my camera off so I can write on the screen. We started off with philosophy and the various area of philosophy being metaphysics, right?
Are you meant to be screen sharing or?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I should be sharing. Hey, one sec. I thought I was sharing, but I wasn't clearly. Are you able to see it now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. That's right. You're most welcome. So philosophy, and we've got metaphysics. We've got epistemology. And then we've got axiology, right? If you don't want to memorize that, just memorize ethics and aesthetics. Yeah. Then we briefly looked into, for example, language. Human beings are linguistic animals, and language allows us to be able to understand and communicate and create civilization as well. So human beings are linguistic animal. Then we looked at, for example, a bit of literature, which make up the humanities. And this is like about text analysis, films, books, and how that affects society. And the role of literature in civilization. Great civilizations produce great literature. What else was there? Religion that we haven't touched, but I will get into it. And then there's also, generally speaking, in the GAMSAT, they don't really talk about religion, God, as much as a question. I think it'd just be too difficult to deal with in a space of 30 minutes, at least for the essays. And then there's also the idea of the arts, right? So arts meaning visual arts and then performing arts. Yeah, this is what we covered so far. Now what we can do is look at the social sciences. So for example, there's politics, there's sociology, slash anthropology. There's economics. By the way, many people here with economics, sociology, anthropology, economics background, or is there anyone here who's done humanities, social sciences, or is everybody here sort of a science background? Law, commerce. No comments. Okay, that's cool. Not a popular question. Law, history. So please correct me if I get anything wrong, right? English lit. Oh, excellent. Got science, finances, engineering. That's great. Excellent. Done some humanities. Cool. So I think English lit, you should be really talking about literature than me. My understanding of literature has been through politics and philosophy. So I haven't really done English lit at university. However, I'm a sort of literature tragic, and I find literature quite interesting and amazing. Especially there are periods of literature, right? You have literature that's modern. There's literature that's postmodern. There's literature that's decolonial, for example. And we'll go through some of these hopefully in the next webinar, where we can look at the epochs and the periods, and there's different schools. So for example, in literature, one of the topics is literary criticism, or literary theory, critical theory. How do we understand and analyze a text? Is it the author that conveys the meaning, or is it the reader that conveys the meaning, right? Similarly to art, is the beauty in the eye of the beholder and the viewer who understands and explains the meaning of art, or is it the artist who actually conveys the meaning? So we've got a lot of allied health, public health. Nice. So all the topical issues when it comes to COVID would be of interest to you, I'm sure. So we've got here, these are primarily some of the social sciences. There are some others that people look into, but for the sake of, I guess, this task, we're just going to keep it brief. So each one of these, for example, legal law goes also into legal studies. Economics also goes into, for example, political economy. Sociology looks into anthropology, looks into critical theory, history and historiography, etc. In terms of social science, and this becomes quite interesting for us, in if I can just give you in one page a sort of breakdown of history, Western intellectual history. I want to call it Western because I'm not going to touch on Eastern philosophy, and I'm not going to touch on, even though there's amazing wisdoms that and philosophical traditions and intellectual schools that come out of Japan, that come out of China, that come out of India, the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on and so forth. Like, for example, if you were to look at Somalia, and Somali poetry is extremely rich, right? And it goes for thousands of years. In West Africa, if you were to look at, in East Africa, if you were to look at West Africa, Timbuktu, modern day Mali, for example, they had one of the greatest libraries in the world, which with manuscripts, right? There were more books in Timbuktu than the number of universities in Europe at one point in time, right? Let me say that again. There were more books. There were more, that's not right. There were more books that were printed and manuscripts that were printed in Timbuktu alone than all of Europe. Yeah. The entire continent of Europe. So just to give you an idea of sort of intellectual heritages that go way back. But in terms of sort of Western understanding and of intellectual thought, just like prior to it, just so we sort of understand that in terms of ancient history, you can say we started with ancient civilizations and ideas of the ancients. This includes, for example, hunter-gatherer societies.
Hey, no,
yeah.
quickly just want to check in time. There was a request that you dissect a quote, make a short plan with ideas, implementing things, which I don't imagine we're going to have time for today. But just for the sociology section, how long do you anticipate that will, how quickly do you think you can get that?
When do you want to finish? Give me a time and I can finish.
We've been on for 2 hours, and I think no one's going to watch a webinar longer than 3 hours on YouTube. I think.
All right, done. How about we go for 20 minutes and we'll stop?
Okay, if you can do like even finish in half an hour, and then if you want to do, I can stop the recording or just keep it lagging on for those that want to stay beyond. And if you've still got the mind for it, you and I can dissect a quote and make a plan with ideas if you wish.
Yeah, sure. Or why don't we actually get everyone to do it? We all do it together, individually, but at the same time.
Sure, although then there's going to be 70 people that want us to
want to share
what they did. Which I'm not saying don't do, but maybe a separate time.
Yeah, no, totally understand.
Anastasia, the terms, can you quickly scroll back, Nosh, to that list of terms that everyone was supposed to research so people can screenshot it? Because, here we go.
So we're going to share this document, right?
Yeah, we'll share. Yes, we will, although there'll be people on YouTube watching it later that may not have the link to it. So screenshot that and research that.
Yep. So political ideologies. I'm just going to write a few more here. Theories. There are actually separate websites on Wikipedia pages, one for sociology, one for anthropology, etc. And you can actually just summarize it so you can understand the different disciplines in a very concise fashion, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
Yeah. So so I think it would be good if we just quickly let's cut it short. 20 minutes, right? We got 20 minutes. I don't
mind if it goes for another half an hour, but not beyond that.
Yeah, that's fine. So what I'll do is I will talk here firstly about sociology. Sociology is interesting and not interesting at the same time. What do I mean by that? Sociology studies societies. Yeah. So it becomes interesting because how do we then differentiate between sociology and anthropology? What's interesting is that there was a time, and this is why history and context is very important, humans and societies. There was a time when Europe colonized, explored different parts of the world, and they would study different civilizations. The study of different civilizations and study of different people and societies and cultures and languages was called anthropology, right? So anthropology is the study of civilizations, cultures, right? human societies, etc. And in many ways, historically, if this is the individual who's doing the studying, then anthropology is about studying the anthropos, right? Cultures here and society here. Whereas Europeans didn't want to study themselves through anthropology. When the European wanted to study himself or herself at that time, they call that, or their own societies at the time, they call that sociology. I know, it's weird. It's ideology, political ideology embedded in it. And this becomes an interesting, because why do we differentiate the other in anthropology, but then when we're studying the self and not the other, we call it sociology? It's a political understanding. Why? Because at that time, they said, well, Europeans are the peak of civilization. We're the ones with the arts, the culture, the history, and ideas. And we are rational and intellectual, and others are not. And I'll tell you an interesting joke, which will come handy. The first time Europeans got to the Americas, right? They called themselves Indians, which is quite interesting because it wasn't India, right? Nonetheless, they called themselves, they called the other Indians. And Europeans at the time believed in a world where Christianity was the savior and the saving mission. For example, Christianity would be able to save you in the hereafter. And they believed in the realm of making sure that there is, I guess, Christians, or there are people who would likely be Christians. So to check whether Indigenous Americans who were native, were actually worthy of being human beings, they would ask the question, do you believe in a God? Do you believe in Jesus Christ, etc.? Right? And this was more of a religious sort of religiosity or sociological study of who the indigenous were. Yet Europe at the time believed they were more scientific and they were more modern. They were able to travel the world as a result of their modern scientific tools. The indigenous people, on the other hand, believed in the realm of the souls. They believed that these people who arrived, who were white-skinned, definitely had souls, but they didn't know if they had bodies, right? Or they were ghosts. So they would actually capture Europeans and dunk them in water to see if water would, the volume of water would actually move. And if it did, they would do scientific experiments. They would say, oh, well, there is a body there. So in many ways, the indigenous Americans were more scientific than the Europeans when they were encountering one another, which I thought was really fascinating. Nonetheless, when we look at sociology, there are two ways of studying the sociological theories, right? One is what we mentioned earlier, positivism, another word for you to know. Positivism is this idea of understanding society or sociology through our sense experiences, through objective facts, that there are social facts, right? Remember the 5 senses? So for example, our society is made up of social facts, right? Social, in many ways, social structures, right? And this is very objective. And there are theories that are anti-positivist. I know these are buzzwords. I would like you to look it up. But anti-positivist is this idea that society, let me just move this here, is actually very subjective or relative. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that society is not objectively about, for example, there's a marketplace, or for example, there are banks and there are schools that make up a society, right? This is an objective definition of what a society is, that there are human beings that are coming together that build institutions, etc. But anti-positivists say, for example, no, it's actually really about human behavior. And just because some societies don't have banks, some societies don't have formal schools, don't make them, don't stop them from or cease to be a civilization or a society, right? So when you are using these in your essays, for example, and you're talking about society, you can say a positive understanding of society is where there's an objective criteria of what defines a society, right? What if we're in the middle of the jungle and we don't have a marketplace, we don't have a bank, we don't have a school, but we have alternative imaginary communities, communities where societies exist. For example, metaverse, something online. Does it not create a real society? Objectivists would say, well, not necessarily. Anti-positivists would say, yeah, there is, because there is a relative understanding of what creates and constructs a society. But in addition to that, there are different sociological theories, or you can say schools of thought, right, within sociology. And these schools of thought can be divided into three. One being what's called symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is this idea that sociology really runs around symbols. What do I mean by symbols? For example, a ring on your fourth finger, right, means that somebody is married, yeah? Ring or a band, right? That wedding ring is symbolic to say something about society, that marriage goes on into that society. There's an idea of commitment. There's an idea of somebody being taken, right? And that would drastically change the dating market, that they're off the market, for example, yeah? Whereas other societies may not, they may not look in that in terms of symbolic nature. So for example, something symbolic and traditional, so tradition comes part of it, is the bride wearing white at the wedding, yeah? In other cultures, for example, Indian culture, you wear red, right? And so on and so forth. So it becomes rather different depending on cultural understanding, and there are symbolic natures of it. Number two, in terms of sociology, is what's called structural functionism. Structural function. And these are terms that you can definitely use in your essays if you come across reading passages, and there have been passages by Durkheim, by Max Weber and others in section 1 in the past. They're often talking about this sort of stuff, right? Structural functionalism, or you can say functionalism, so sorry. Or functionalist theory, they say. This is this idea that it's not about individuals. If symbolic nature was about individual behavior and relative behavior, this is about structures and macro behavior / macro behavior, which is this idea that society is made up of structures. Once again, this idea of markets, of banks. There is a political structure, there is an economic structure, right? There is for example, a cultural structure, right? So for example, in Hinduism, we have a caste system, which is a cultural structure. There is collectivism in Asian cultures where 3 generations live under the same roof, right? Collectivism, right? Versus, for example, in Western cultures, it's about individualism, yeah, which is this idea that I can make my own decisions, etc. So this is really sort of the second way of understanding society. And the third way, and this is more of a Marxist idea, is what's called a conflict theory of society. What is a conflict theory of society? And perhaps we'll end here with sociology, is this idea that there are different
Yeah, bro, you're muted.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so conflict theory, were you able to hear conflict theory?
Yep.
Yep, cool. So conflict theory is this sort of Marxian understanding, right? What does conflict theory come from? It comes from a philosopher by the name of Marxist teacher. So Marxist teacher by the name of Hegel. I don't know if you've heard of this dude, German dude, J.W.F. Hegel, George William Frederick Hegel. And he came up with this idea, came up with this idea called the dialectic, right? The dialectic is basically this, that for everything, right, there's a thesis. The way we define something is a thesis, like a contention or a thesis statement you have. And opposite that, we have what's called an antithesis. Yeah. And everything is in conflict. So
We're not
for
sharing
example,
anymore.
I thought I was. Okay, there we go. Is that okay? So I said conflict theory. There's Karl Marx and his teacher Hegel, who came up with this idea of dialectic: thesis, antithesis. So for example, every society has conflicts. There is the rich versus poor in capitalism. Yeah. In American political movement, there is the brutal police force, excuse me, and there is African American communities, right? And you can see where I'm going here, right? There are people who believe in, for example, right-wing politics versus left-wing politics. What is the difference between right-wing and left-wing? We'll come to that, to another question, another day when we cover politics. But what happens is there's always a tension going on between the rich and the poor, the have and the have-nots. And this often creates a revolution. And through this revolution, what we end up seeing is a new idea, a new concept, which is a synthesis. And this synthesis becomes a new thesis, and this evolution or revolution continues. Antithesis, and so on and so forth, creates a new synthesis, which becomes a new thesis, right? To infinity. Well, not to infinity. He says it ends up in this absolute oneness and aesthetics. But this is Hegel's idea of conflict theory, that societies are always in conflict, right? There's the Liberal Party, there's the Labour Party. They're going to fight against each other and going to come up with new ideas, and new political systems will be formed. New political parties will be formed. Like, for example, today we start seeing the Greens, right? Which are the third alternative. But say 20 years ago, it used to be Democrats, but there's Democrats aren't really around anymore. Yeah. Because this sort of synthesis of a new idea, the Greens have come in, they've become a new thesis, and then maybe they won't be around. There's the old liberals, the classical liberals, there's the modern liberals, and so on and so forth. So this is the third way of understanding society, through sociology, right? Let's end it here. I think we've been at it for quite some time. I would have loved to have sort of taken everything apart in one sitting, and maybe next time we can go through that. We can go from antiquity, classics, to modernity, to postmodernity. If you have any questions, it's now my time, I guess, to listen and for you to speak and ask and discuss and critique, you know, me as well.
Can I clarify that we haven't, so you've got to the first part of social sciences, sociology, but underneath that there was, oh no, we did politics.
Economics, politics.
Actually, no, some economics would be useful for the, but I know you, if we get into that, that's where you're going to go on for. I would really rather have the next bit be about different tonally, in the sense of that chronology that you mentioned. So depending on whether people have got any steam left in them, and right, Jess, we can start earlier. Is there anything? Is there any way to avoid going through the rest? You can't. I feel like there's certain things like economics, like free market capitalism, neoliberalism. These kinds of things are kind of big words in GAMSAT.
Yeah, I think
somewhat.
Yeah, I think what would be good is, because this is me freestyling, I'll take some time to come up with a proper structure so that I can do it in half an hour, you know, and to be able to really make it concise and give you the links as well for everything. I apologize, I had like maybe 20 minutes to prepare for it.
No, that's fine.
So, yeah.
Just for the recording, because they're not going to be able to see the chat, I did mention earlier that I've spoken with Naushad and he's happy to take on a few students. I've already seen God knows how many, pardon my language. Anyway, a lot of emails regarding that. Just email me at 90+GAMSAT and put Naushad in the thing, and I'll get something together and send it across to you, like a link where you can organize that.
Yeah, no worries at all. This is my personal email if you guys have any questions.
feel free to hit me up. Any questions, like if you want to speak on the phone, happy to help you out. No problem. I have time. I resigned from my work. So
mind you,
That's
on
good.
that point, I do want to point out to those that are interested in Nosh being tutored. And actually, I wanted to ask you, the reason I originally wanted to do a YouTube video with you is because of your position at VETASES and the similarities that they have with ISAR by being in competition with ISAR, and the degree to which you can infer from your role in that and your knowledge of ISAR that ISAR and the GAMSAT is indeed a psychometric test.
So just a bit about where I was working. I was actually working in sort of the executive team of what's called VETASES. It's a company. It's a commercial arm of Bendigo, Kangan, TAFE. And believe it or not, they're a competitor to ISAR who write the GAMSAT exam. VETASES used to do the nursing tests, the police testing and others. And obviously ISAR does GAMSAT and a whole bunch of other testing spaces. What's interesting is the person who developed GAMSAT, his name is Peter Congdon. He was a psychometrician for ISAR. And I think you guys know enough about psychometrics now to understand what it is. But the process of sort of coming up with questions, this is how generally ISAR develops it. And I don't know if I can mention ISAR in this video, so maybe I shouldn't. But the way they develop the questions, and all other companies do as well, like Pearson Education, all the big ones in America as well, is that they write a whole bunch of different questions from question makers, right? Then they go through a process of psychometrically validating questions, like do certain words, are they going to be easy for people to analyze personalities, psychologies, the way of thinking, right, associated with it. And the people who do this sort of validation, they have a look at all these reports and they do a statistical analysis of all these questions, and then which are good questions, which are bad questions, which is why ISAR, as you probably know on the GAMSAT, will give you certain questions that are not going to be marked. It's not going to be part of GAMSAT, but they're just trialing out these questions. And in the future, they'll probably put those questions up in the GAMSAT. And Peter Congdon, wonderful gentleman, he's the one who's sort of the brain behind GAMSAT. And because of my sort of working relationship, at that time, I just started sort of Frasers with Scott, and we were going through, tuition and, sort of our students. We had a one-on-one chat with him. And I said, look, Scott teaches section 3, I teach section 1 and 2. What would you recommend as a psychometrician for ISAR who developed the GAMSAT? What would you recommend to teach GAMSAT students? And he's like, oh shit, don't ask me that question. But what was interesting is that it actually confirmed what we were already doing. He said, for section 1, for example, go through terminologies, go through vocab, go through ability to read complex passages, right? The way to develop your linguistic ability, and for me, for example, as a second language learner, I always struggle with new languages. The formula that one of my teachers taught me is, I'll write it down, I plus 1, right, is equal to sort of linguistic growth. What do I mean by that? I being where I am currently in my language learning. So I'm studying French, I'm studying politics, I'm studying physics. Wherever I am, challenge yourself to read just that one level higher where you don't understand something, right? Because this is what GAMSAT does when it comes to exam questions. You challenge yourself to read that one level higher. Then as you're reading it, it's going to make more sense to you, right? And when you get to that level, you challenge yourself again a little bit higher, and then again a little bit higher, which is why a lot of the times when you're reading section 1 passages, they don't make sense. It's like, what is this, pile of shit, right? But the reason they do that is because they get passages from text and then they take out, right? Like I used to sit the GAMSAT, now and then just to keep up with the test. They take out key critical sentences from passages so that it won't make sense. Like, for example, an argument has a premise, and a contention, right? They will take out the contention and they'll just leave you the premises. And then you're supposed to be able to come up with the way that it concludes. And this is how they're testing your reasoning. Or they'll, give you certain missing premises. Like, for example, if I was to say, if it rains today, then Michael will see me, right? If I said that sentence, if it rains today, then Michael will see me, you will say, what the heck? That doesn't make sense. You're mad, right? But then if I say, if it rains today,
then I'll wear my really bright yellow raincoat. And if I wear my really bright yellow raincoat, then Michael will see me. It makes far more sense. So that bright yellow raincoat, which ties the whole argument together as a premise, is actually taken out for some of the GAMSAT passages. And this is what they were doing on purpose, to be able to test your level of thinking for section 1. So this is why it's important to study a bit of logical reasoning. It doesn't have to be formal logic, but so you understand what's a premise, what's an argument, what is a contention, how do premises lead to a contention, etc. Also to be able to read these sort of difficult passages, right, from time and again. So when you come across a name on Wikipedia, say, for example, you come across John Stuart Mill or Hegel, as I mentioned, who is, oh my God, the most difficult guy to read on the freaking planet. Like I get headaches reading Hegel. I'm just thinking about how much I tortured myself trying to read Hegel. But when I was reading Hegel, after a while, you get used to that language and you start understanding the discursive nature of the language and the ideas that he goes into. Then you go back to the GAMSAT section 1 essays, you can read some of the philosophical sections and go, oh yeah, I understand what it means, right? Because I understand what the words are. So this is what he was saying. He's saying focus on vocab, focus on the knowledge and the terminologies, and also to be able to do to be able to grasp information quickly. I'm a very slow reader, as I was mentioning, but what I can do is read in a way where I can understand what the ideas are. Hegel, that's right, yeah. So the name is JWF, Hegel, German philosopher. Don't read Hegel, don't read it. It's freaking confusing. Start with something easier, right? Start with Marx, start with, Rene Descartes even, right? Cartesian plane, XY axis.
Hey, can I just cut in? I've just been in the background to save people having to email me manually doing. I've just made a link. Oh, I've figured. At that link that I just put in the chat, 90plusgamsat.com/bookings. It wasn't made for him, but that will show Shabir, me, and Naushad, and I need to make a separate section for Naushad. But in the interim, if you wish to hire Naushad, you can click in his name and then choose either the single session or the pack of 8, and it'll take you.
So when I was talking to him, this is what he was saying about section 1. Logical reasoning, like the tools to be able to come up with it, study humanities and social sciences, philosophy, etc. And for section 3, he was like, focus on mathematics, doing maths quickly, focus on ability to answer questions in a logical format. So for example, your index laws, your indices, learn them very quickly. One of the questions that used to come up, I don't know if it still does, the rate of the rate of change of a human nail, how fast does it grow, right? And it's got all these indices numbers. Like you need to be able to transpose formulas quickly, to be able to look at numerator, denominator quickly. I never studied science until after year 12, right? So I went into university, but I think I got 51, 52 or something without studying anything for section 3. Like I don't even know physics or biology, right? Just using logical reasoning. So it's not my area, so I never bothered. But you can actually use logic, and if you're good at mathematics, to be able to come up with ways that you can actually do well for section 1 and section 3.
I've been through. What did you get in section 1 and 2?
I did all right. I got 80s.
Was that you got 80, like high 80s in section 2 with an essay? Was that you that said that?
Yeah. But then, come on, I don't study, but that was my degree. I studied.
Was it you that said the one essay? You did one essay, or was that Akif?
I didn't do one essay. No, I wrote 2 essays.
Oh, okay.
But then I switched them around. But for section 1, what I did was I did half of it, and then I stopped reading and doing the questions, and I started memorizing the sources that they used, so that we could start using the same sources. And I actually had half the books in my library. So yeah. Anyway,
cheeky.
Thank you so much, everyone. Nadia, if you feel free to go, by the way, if you need to. So. Yeah, so when we sat down with Peter Congdon, this is what he was saying in terms of, doing, working on your tools and then doing heaps of practice questions, right? Just do as many practice questions as you can. That's the other way of doing it. I don't know if that's helpful, not helpful.
Let's wrap this up now. It's been going for ages. You are so interesting to listen to talk. Thank you so much.
I wish you'd given me more time, man. Like you gave me.
It's good. It's good to be able to just do a freestyle, man. Also, firstly, so it doesn't take as much time from you, and also you talk from your heart and in a way that's authentic and less contrived, and it's better. It's good. It's good. That is so helpful. I cannot wait to put that on YouTube. I'm gonna have to get rid of Shabir's on after now. We'll keep both, but I will let everyone else know what time we're going to be capping off the other side of this, which will be that kind of chronological thing. And I think you'll see as well, I kind of know where he's going with that because it's similar to what me and Shabir did do. That's where you're going to see all of the ideas stop being in the realm of abstraction and theory, and you're starting to be able to locate it in history. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of this come together. So it's something I definitely wouldn't miss. I'm so privileged.
Can I give one last comment?
You can give as many comments you like, mate. I just love you.
I was just wanted to say, look, a lot of people find the GAMSAT very daunting and it's difficult. And it's like, oh, you know, when am I going to get into medicine or I'm going to get into dentistry? Believe me, if you have the will and consistency, you'll get in. There's no questions asked, because I have yet to see anyone with the willpower and consistency who haven't got in. I had one student. He came to me after he sat the GAMSAT 5 times, right? And he studied with me for 2 years, and it was really, really rewarding when he got in. And he's now in first year at University of Notre Dame in Sydney. I still keep in touch with him. You know, I caught up with him in December just after Christmas. He's older than me. He's like 37. But it's just so rewarding to know that all the stuff that he has done, the hard work, you will get in. It's not a question if, it's a question of when. So some people will get in straight away, which I hope you all do. And some people take a bit more time. And believe me, having that maturity going in, you'll actually be a better doctor because you would have lived, you would have had that experience, right? The emotional intelligence, the bedside manners, etc. And that to me is like rewarding enough, just to know that people that I've helped to get in, you know, thousands now in med school, actually have the capacity to be able to relate to people and understand people. And when you become an oncologist and psychiatrist and so on and so forth, you have that empathy and you see them for who they are rather than just a patient, and, you know, don't get disheartened by the hospital system. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, remind everyone. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have to interrupt you and say that was just phenomenal. Like, you actually brought me to tears. I just thought Michael is so right. The way you just speak is truly from the heart, and it's really motivating listening to you. I just had to let you know, because I got to give something back as much as you give to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anastasia. I'm very honored to have met you all. It's my honor to be here.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Nosh. I love you all. We'll see you next week. Yeah, you've got Nosh's email. You've got my email, 90plusgamsat @gmail.com if you have any questions. And we'll see you in the group, I guess. Much love. See you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks heaps, guys.
Bye.